Chapter 6 of The Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6 The City of Beasts. When noon came, they opened the Fox King's basket of luncheon and found a nice roasted turkey with cranberry sauce and some slices of bread and butter. As they sat on the grass by the roadside, the Shaggy Man cut up the turkey with his pocket-knife and passed slices of it around. "Haven't you any dewdrops or mist cakes or cloud buns?" asked Polychrome longingly. "Course not," replied Dorothy. "We eat solid things down here on the earth. But there's a bottle of cold tea. Try some, won't you?" The Rainbow's Daughter watched Button-Bright devour one leg of the turkey. "Is it good?" she asked. He nodded. "Do you think I could eat it?" "Not this," said Button-Bright. "But I mean another piece." "Don't know," he replied. "Well, I'm going to try, for I'm very hungry," she decided, and took a thin slice of the white breast of turkey which the Shaggy Man cut for her, as well as a bit of bread and butter. When she tasted it, Polychrome thought the turkey was good, better even than mist cakes, but a little satisfied her hunger, and she finished with a tiny sip of cold tea. "That's about as much as a fly would eat," said Dorothy, who was making a good meal herself. "But I know some people in Oz who eat nothing at all." "Who are they?" inquired the Shaggy Man. "One is a scarecrow who's stuffed with straw, and the other a woodman made out of tin. They haven't any appetites inside of 'em, you see, so they never eat anything at all." "Are they alive?" asked Button-Bright. "Oh, yes," replied Dorothy, "and they're very clever, and very nice, too. If we get to Oz I'll introduce them to you." "Do you really expect to get to Oz?" inquired the Shaggy Man, taking a drink of cold tea. "I don't know just what to 'spect," answered the child seriously, "but I've noticed if I happen to get lost I'm almost sure to come to the Land of Oz in the end, somehow or other. So I may get there this time. But I can't promise, you know. All I can do is wait and see." "Will the Scarecrow scare me?" asked Button-Bright. "No, 'cause you're not a crow," she returned. "He has the loveliest smile you ever saw, only it's painted on and he can't help it." Luncheon being over, they started again upon their journey, the Shaggy Man, Dorothy, and Button-Bright walking soberly along side by side, and the Rainbow's Daughter dancing merrily before them. Sometimes she darted along the road so swiftly that she was nearly out of sight. Then she came tripping back to greet them with her silvery laughter. But once she came back more sedately to say, "There's a city a little way off." "I 'spected that," returned Dorothy, "for the fox people warned us there was one on this road. It's filled with stupid beasts of some sort, and we mustn't be afraid of 'em, 'cause they won't hurt us." "All right," said Button-Bright, but Polychrome didn't know whether it was all right or not. "It's a big city," she said, "and the road runs straight through it." "Never mind," said the Shaggy Man. "As long as I carry the Love Magnet, every living creature will love me, and you may be sure I shan't allow any of my friends to be harmed in any way." This comforted them somewhat, and they moved on again. Pretty soon they came to a signpost that read, "Half a mile to Dunkiton." "Oh," said the Shaggy Man, "if they're donkeys we have nothing to fear at all." "They may kick," said Dorothy doubtfully. "Then we will cut some switches and make them behave," he replied. At the first tree he cut himself a long, slender switch from one of the branches, and shorter switches for the others. "Don't be afraid to order the beasts around," he said. "They're used to it." Before long the road brought them to the gates of the city. There was a high wall all around, which had been whitewashed, and the gate just before our travelers was a mere opening in the wall with no bars across it. No towers or steeples or domes showed above the enclosure, nor was any living thing to be seen as our friends drew near. Suddenly, as they were about to boldly enter through the opening, There arose a harsh clamor of sound that swelled and echoed on every side, until they were nearly deafened by the racket, and had to put their fingers to their ears to keep the noise out. It was like the firing of many cannon, only there were no cannon balls or other missiles to be seen. It was like the rolling of mighty thunder, only not a cloud was in the sky. It was like the roar of countless breakers on a rugged seashore, only there was no sea or other water anywhere about. They hesitated to advance, but as the noise did no harm, they entered through the whitewashed wall and quickly discovered the cause of the turmoil. Inside were suspended many sheets of tin or thin iron, and against these metal sheets a row of donkeys were pounding their heels with vicious kicks. The Shaggy Man ran up to the nearest donkey and gave the beast a sharp blow with his switch. "Stop that noise!" he shouted, and the donkey stopped kicking the metal sheet and turned its head to look with surprise at the Shaggy Man. He switched the next donkey and made him stop, and then the next, so that gradually the rattling of heels ceased and the awful noise subsided. The donkeys stood in a group and eyed the strangers with fear and trembling. "What do you mean by making such a racket?" asked the Shaggy Man sternly. "We were scaring away the foxes," said one of the donkeys meekly. "Usually they run fast enough when they hear the noise, which makes them afraid." "There are no foxes here," said the Shaggy Man. "I beg to differ with you. There's one, anyhow," replied the donkey, sitting upright on its haunches and waving a hoof toward Button Bright. "We saw him coming and thought the whole army of foxes was marching to attack us." "Button Bright isn't a fox," explained the Shaggy Man. "He's only wearing a fox head for a time, until he can get his own head back." "Oh, I see," remarked the donkey, waving its left ear reflectively. "I'm sorry we made such a mistake and had all our work and worry for nothing." The other donkeys by this time were sitting up and examining the strangers with big glassy eyes. They made a queer picture indeed, for they wore wide white collars around their necks, and the collars had many scallops and points. The gentlemen donkeys wore high pointed caps set between their great ears, and the lady donkeys wore sunbonnets with holes cut in the top for the ears to stick through. But they had no other clothing except their hairy skins, although many wore gold and silver bangles on their front wrists and bands of different metals on their rear ankles. When they were kicking they had braced themselves with their front legs, but now they all stood or sat upright on their hind legs and used the front ones as arms. Having no fingers or hands, the beasts were rather clumsy, as you may guess. But Dorothy was surprised to observe how many things they could do with their stiff, heavy hoofs. Some of the donkeys were white, some were brown or gray or black or spotted, but their hair was sleek and smooth, and their broad collars and caps gave them a neat, if whimsical, appearance. "This is a nice way to welcome visitors, I must say," remarked the Shaggy Man in a reproachful tone. "Oh, we did not mean to be impolite," replied a gray donkey which had not spoken before. "But you were not expected, nor did you send in your visiting cards as it is proper to do." "There is some truth in that," admitted the Shaggy Man. "But now you are informed that we are important and distinguished travelers, I trust you will accord us proper consideration." These big words delighted the donkeys, and made them bow to the Shaggy Man with great respect. Said the gray one, "You shall be taken before his great and glorious Majesty, King Kik-a-bray, who will greet you as becomes your exalted stations." "That's right," answered Dorothy. "Take us to some one who knows something." "Oh, we all know something, my child, or we shouldn't be donkeys," asserted the gray one with dignity. "The word donkey means clever, you know." "I didn't know it," she replied. "I thought it meant stupid." "Not at all, my child. If you will look in the Encyclopedia Duncaniara you will find I'm correct. But come, I will myself lead you before our splendid, exalted and most intellectual ruler." All donkeys love big words, so it is no wonder the gray one used so many of them. End of chapter 6. Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7. The Shaggy Man's Transformation. They found the houses of the town all low and square and built of bricks, neatly whitewashed inside and out. The houses were not set in rows, forming regular streets, but placed here and there in a haphazard manner which made it puzzling for a stranger to find his way. "Stupid people must have streets and numbered houses in their cities to guide them where they go," observed the gray donkey, as he walked before the visitors on his hind legs, in an awkward but comical manner. "But clever donkeys know their way without such absurd marks. Moreover, a mixed city is much prettier than one with straight streets." Dorothy did not agree with this, but she said nothing to contradict it. Presently she saw a sign on a house that read, "Madame de Fake, Hoofist," and she asked their conductor, "What's a hoofist, please?" "One who reads your fortune in your hoofs," replied the gray donkey. "Oh, I see," said the little girl. "You are quite civilized here." "Dunkiton," he replied, "is the center of the world's highest civilization." They came to a house where two youthful donkeys were whitewashing the wall, and Dorothy stopped a moment to watch them. They dipped the ends of their tails, which were much like paint brushes, into a pail of whitewash, backed up against the house, and wagged their tails right and left until the whitewash was rubbed on the wall, after which they dipped these funny brushes in the pail again and repeated the performance. "That must be fun," said Button-Bright. "No, it's work," replied the old donkey, "but we make our youngsters do all the whitewashing to keep them out of mischief." "Don't they go to school?" asked Dorothy. "All donkeys are born wise," was the reply, "so the only school we need is the school of experience. Books are only for those who know nothing, and so are obliged to learn from other people." "In other words, the more stupid one is, the more he thinks he knows," observed the Shaggy Man. The gray donkey paid no attention to this speech, because he had just stopped before a house which had painted over the doorway a pair of hoofs with a donkey tail between them and a rude crown and scepter above. "I'll see if his magnificent Majesty King Kikabray is at home," said he. He lifted his head and called, "Wee haw! Wee haw! Wee haw!" 3 times in a shocking voice, turning about and kicking with his heels against the panel of the door. For a time there was no reply. Then the door opened far enough to permit a donkey's head to stick out and look at them. It was a white head, with big, awful ears and round, solemn eyes. "Have the foxes gone?" it asked in a trembling voice. "They haven't been here, most stupendous Majesty," replied the gray one. "The new arrivals prove to be travelers of distinction." "Oh," said the King in a relieved tone of voice, "let them come in." He opened the door wide and the party marched into a big room, which, Dorothy thought, looked quite unlike a king's palace. There were mats of woven grasses on the floor, and the place was clean and neat, but his Majesty had no other furniture at all, perhaps because he didn't need it. He squatted down in the center of the room, and a little brown donkey ran and brought a big gold crown, which it placed on the monarch's head, and a golden staff with a jeweled ball at the end of it, which the King held between his front hoofs as he sat upright. "Now then," said his Majesty, waving his long ears gently to and fro, "tell me why you are here, and what you expect me to do for you." He eyed Button-Bright rather sharply, as if afraid of the little boy's queer head, though it was the Shaggy Man who undertook to reply. "Most noble and supreme ruler of Dunkiton," he said, trying not to laugh at the solemn King's face, We are strangers traveling through your dominions, and have entered your magnificent city because the road led through it, and there was no way to go around. All we desire is to pay our respects to your majesty, the cleverest king in all the world, I'm sure, and then to continue on our way." This polite speech pleased the king very much. Indeed, it pleased him so much that it proved an unlucky speech for the Shaggy Man. Perhaps the Love Magnet helped to win his majesty's affections as well as the flattery, but however this may be, the white donkey looked kindly upon the speaker and said, "Only a donkey should be able to use such fine big words, and you are too wise and admirable in all ways to be a mere man. Also, I feel that I love you as well as I do my own favored people, so I will bestow upon you the greatest gift within my power, a donkey's head." As he spoke, he waved his jeweled staff. Although the Shaggy Man cried out and tried to leap backward and escape it, it proved of no use. Suddenly his own head was gone, and a donkey head appeared in its place, a brown, shaggy head, so absurd and droll that Dorothy and Polly both broke into merry laughter, and even Button-Bright's fox face wore a smile. "Dear me! Dear me!" cried the Shaggy Man, feeling of his shaggy new head and his long ears. "What a misfortune! What a great misfortune! Give me back my own head, you stupid king, if you love me at all." "Don't you like it?" asked the king, surprised. "Hee-haw! I hate it! Take it away quick!" said the Shaggy Man. "But I can't do that," was the reply. "My magic works only one way. I can do things, but I can't undo them. You'll have to find the Truth Pond and bathe in its water in order to get back your own head. But I advise you not to do that. This head is much more beautiful than the old one." "That's a matter of taste," said Dorothy. "Where is the Truth Pond?" asked the Shaggy Man earnestly. "Somewhere in the Land of Oz, but just the exact location of it I cannot tell," was the answer. "Don't worry, Shaggy Man," said Dorothy, smiling because her friend wagged his new ears so comically. "If the Truth Pond is in Oz, we'll be sure to find it when we get there." "Oh, are you going to the Land of Oz?" asked King Kik-a-bray. "I don't know," she replied, "but we've been told we are nearer the Land of Oz than to Kansas, and if that's so, the quickest way for me to get home is to find Ozma." "Oh, do you know the mighty Princess Ozma?" asked the King, his tone both surprised and eager. "'Course I do. She's my friend," said Dorothy. "Then perhaps you'll do me a favor," continued the white donkey, much excited. "What is it?" she asked. "Perhaps you can get me an invitation to Princess Ozma's birthday celebration, which will be the grandest royal function ever held in Fairyland. I'd love to go." "Hee-haw! You deserve punishment rather than reward for giving me this dreadful head," said the Shaggy Man sorrowfully. "I wish you wouldn't say hee-haw so much," Polychrome begged him. "It makes cold chills run down my back." "But I can't help it, my dear. My donkey head wants to bray continually," he replied. "Doesn't your fox head want to yelp every minute?" he asked Button-Bright. "Don't know," said the boy, still staring at the Shaggy Man's ears. These seemed to interest him greatly, and the sight also made him forget his own fox head, which was a comfort. "What do you think, Polly? Shall I promise the Donkey King an invitation to Ozma's party?" asked Dorothy of the Rainbow's Daughter, who was flitting about the room like a sunbeam because she could never keep still. "Do as you please, dear," answered Polychrome. "He might help to amuse the guests of the Princess." "Then if you will give us some supper and a place to sleep tonight, and let us get started on our journey early tomorrow morning," said Dorothy to the King, "I'll ask Ozma to invite you, if I happen to get to Oz." "Good! Hee-haw! Excellent!" cried Kik-a-bray, much pleased. "You shall all have fine suppers and good beds. What food would you prefer, a bran mash or ripe oats in the shell?" "Neither one," replied Dorothy promptly. "Perhaps plain hay or some sweet juicy grass would suit you better," suggested Kik-a-bray musingly. "Is that all you have to eat?" asked the girl. "What more do you desire?" "Well, you see we're not donkeys," she explained, "so we're used to other food. The foxes gave us a nice supper in Foxville." "We'd like some dewdrops and mist cakes," said Polychrome. "I'd prefer apples and a ham sandwich," declared the Shaggy Man, "for although I've a donkey head I still have my own particular stomach." "I want pie," said Button Bright. "I think some beefsteak and chocolate layer cake would taste best," said Dorothy. "Hee haw! I declare!" exclaimed the King. "It seems each of you wants a different food. How queer all living creatures are, except donkeys." "And donkeys, like you, are queerest of all," laughed Polychrome. "Well," decided the King, "I suppose my magic staff will produce the things you crave. If you are lacking in good taste, it is not my fault." With this he waved his staff with the jeweled ball, and before them instantly appeared a tea table, set with linen and pretty dishes, and on the table were the very things each had wished for. Dorothy's beefsteak was smoking hot, and the Shaggy Man's apples were plump and rosy cheeked. The King had not thought to provide chairs, so they all stood in their places around the table and ate with good appetite, being hungry. The Rainbow's Daughter found 3 tiny dewdrops on a crystal plate, and Button Bright had a big slice of apple pie, which he devoured eagerly. Afterward the King called the brown donkey, which was his favorite servant, and bade it lead his guests to the vacant house where they had to pass the night. It had only one room, and no furniture except beds of clean straw and a few mats of woven grasses, but our travelers were contented with these simple things because they realized it was the best the Donkey King had to offer them. As soon as it was dark they lay down on the mats and slept comfortably until morning. At daybreak there was a dreadful noise throughout the city. Every donkey in the place brayed. When he heard this the Shaggy Man woke up and called out "Hee haw!" as loud as he could. "Stop that!" said Button Bright in a cross voice. Both Dorothy and Polly looked at the Shaggy Man reproachfully. "I couldn't help it, my dears," he said, as if ashamed of his bray, "but I'll try not to do it again." Of course they forgave him, for as he still had the Love Magnet in his pocket they were all obliged to love him as much as ever. They did not see the King again, but Kik-a-bray remembered them, for a table appeared again in their room with the same food upon it as on the night before. "Don't want pie for breakfast," said Button Bright. "I'll give you some of my beefsteak," proposed Dorothy. "There's plenty for us all." That suited the boy better, but the Shaggy Man said he was content with his apples and sandwiches, although he ended the meal by eating Button Bright's pie. Polly liked her dewdrops and mist cakes better than any other food, so they all enjoyed an excellent breakfast. Toto had the scraps left from the beefsteak, and he stood up nicely on his hind legs while Dorothy fed them to him. Breakfast ended, they passed through the village to the side opposite that by which they had entered, the brown servant donkey guiding them through the maze of scattered houses. There was the road again, leading far away into the unknown country beyond. "King Kik-a-bray says you must not forget his invitation," said the brown donkey, as they passed through the opening in the wall. "I shan't," promised Dorothy. Perhaps no one ever beheld a more strangely assorted group than the one which now walked along the road, through pretty green fields and past groves of feathery pepper trees and fragrant mimosa. Polychrome, her beautiful gauzy robes floating around her like a rainbow cloud, went first, dancing back and forth, and darting now here to pluck a wild flower, or there to watch a beetle crawl across the path. Toto ran after her at times, barking joyously the while, only to become sober again and trot along at Dorothy's heels. The little Kansas girl walked holding Button Bright's hand clasped in her own, and the wee boy with his fox head, covered by the sailor hat, presented an odd appearance. Strangest of all, perhaps, was the Shaggy Man with his shaggy donkey head, who shuffled along in the rear with his hands thrust deep in his big pockets. None of the party was really unhappy. All were straying in an unknown land, and had suffered more or less annoyance and discomfort, but they realized they were having a fairy adventure in a fairy country, and were much interested in finding out what would happen next. End of chapter 7. Of the Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8. The Musicker. About the middle of the forenoon they began to go up a long hill. By and by this hill suddenly dropped down into a pretty valley, where the travelers saw, to their surprise, a small house standing by the roadside. It was the first house they had seen, and they hastened into the valley to discover who lived there. No one was in sight as they approached, but when they began to get nearer the house they heard queer sounds coming from it. They could not make these out at first, but as they became louder our friends thought they heard a sort of music, like that made by a wheezy hand organ. The music fell upon their ears in this way: tiddle widdle little bum 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 bum, tiddle 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 bum 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 ba. "What is it? A band or a mouth organ?" asked Dorothy. "Don't know," said Button-Bright. "Sounds to me like a played-out phonograph," said the Shaggy Man, lifting his enormous ears to listen. "Oh, there just couldn't be a funnygraph in Fairyland!" cried Dorothy. "It's rather pretty, isn't it?" asked Polychrome, trying to dance to the strains. "Tiddle widdle little bum 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 bum," came the music to their ears, more distinctly as they drew nearer the house. Presently they saw a little fat man sitting on a bench before the door. He wore a red braided jacket that reached to his waist, a blue waistcoat, and white trousers with gold stripes down the sides. On his bald head was perched a little round red cap, held in place by a rubber elastic underneath his chin. His face was round, his eyes a faded blue, and he wore white cotton gloves. The man leaned on a stout gold-headed cane, bending forward on his seat to watch his visitors approach. Singularly enough, the musical sounds they had heard seemed to come from the inside of the fat man himself, for he was playing no instrument, nor was any to be seen near him. They came up and stood in a row, staring at him, and he stared back, while the queer sounds came from him as before. Tiddle little little bum bum bum, whittle whittle little bum bum ba. "Why, he's a regular musicker," said Button-Bright. "What's a musicker?" asked Dorothy. "Him," said the boy. Hearing this, the fat man sat up a little stiffer than before, as if he had received a compliment, and still came the sounds: tiddle widdle little bum bum bum. "Stop it!" cried the Shaggy Man earnestly. "Stop that dreadful noise!" The fat man looked at him sadly and began his reply. When he spoke, the music changed and the words seemed to accompany the notes. He said, or rather sang: "It isn't the noise that you hear, but music harmonic and clear. My breath makes me play like an organ all day. That bass note is in my left ear." "How funny!" exclaimed Dorothy. "He says his breath makes the music." "That's all nonsense," declared the Shaggy Man. But now the music began again, and they all listened carefully. "My lungs are full of reeds like those in organs, therefore I suppose if I breathe in or out my nose the reeds are bound to play. So as I breathe to live, you know, I squeeze my music as I go. I'm very sorry this is so, forgive my piping, pray." "Poor man," said Polychrome. "He can't help it. What a great misfortune it is." "Yes," replied the Shaggy Man, We are only obliged to hear his music a short time, until we leave him and go away, but the poor fellow must listen to himself as long as he lives, and that is enough to drive him crazy. Don't you think so?" "Don't know," said Button Bright. "Toto said 'Wow, wow,' and the others laughed." "Perhaps that's why he lives all alone," suggested Dorothy. "Yes, if he had neighbors they might do him an injury," responded the Shaggy Man. All this while the little fat Musicker was breathing the notes tiddle diddle diddle bum bum, and they had to speak loud in order to hear themselves. The Shaggy Man said, "Who are you, sir?" The reply came in the shape of this sing-song: "I'm Allegra de Capo, a very famous man. Just find another higher low to match me if you can. Some people try but can't do play, and have to practice every day. But I've been musical always, since first my life began." "Why, I believe he's proud of it!" exclaimed Dorothy. "And seems to me I've heard worse music than he makes." "Where?" asked Button Bright. "I've forgotten just now, but Mr. Da Capo is certainly a strange person, isn't he? And perhaps he's the only one of his kind in all the world." This praise seemed to please the little fat Musicker, for he swelled out his chest, looked important, and sang as follows: "I wear no band around me, and yet I am a band. I do not strain to make my strains, but on the other hand, my toot is always destitute of flats or other errors. To C sharp and B natural are for me but minor terrors." "I don't quite understand that," said Polychrome, with a puzzled look, "but perhaps it's because I'm accustomed only to the music of the spheres." "What's that?" asked Button Bright. "Oh, Polly means the atmosphere and the hemisphere, I suppose," explained Dorothy. "Oh," said Button Bright. "Bow wow," said Toto. But the Musicker was still breathing his constant bum 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 bum, and it seemed to jar on the Shaggy Man's nerves. "Stop it, can't you?" he cried angrily. "Or breathe in a whisper, or put a clothespin on your nose. Do something, anyhow." But the fat one, with a sad look, sang this answer: "Music has charms, and it may soothe even the savage, they say. So if savage you feel, just list to my reel, for sooth to say that's the real way." The Shaggy Man had to laugh at this, and when he laughed he stretched his donkey mouth wide open. Said Dorothy, "I don't know how good his poetry is, but it seems to fit the notes, so that's all that can be expected." "I like it," said Button Bright, who was staring hard at the Musicker, his little legs spread wide apart. To the surprise of his companions the boy asked this long question: "If I swallowed a mouth organ, what would I be?" "An organette," said the Shaggy Man. "But come, my dears, I think the best thing we can do is to continue on our journey before Button Bright swallows anything. We must try to find that Land of Oz, you know." Hearing this speech, the Musicker sang quickly: "If you go to the Land of Oz, please take me along, because on Ozma's birthday I'm anxious to play the loveliest song ever was." "No, thank you," said Dorothy. "We prefer to travel alone. But if I see Ozma I'll tell her you want to come to her birthday party." "Let's be going," urged the Shaggy Man anxiously. Polly was already dancing along the road, far in advance, and the others turned to follow her. Toto did not like the fat Musicker, and made a grab for his chubby leg. Dorothy quickly caught up the growling little dog and hurried after her companions, who were walking faster than usual in order to get out of hearing. They had to climb a hill, and until they got to the top they could not escape the Musicker's monotonous piping: bum 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 bum, twiddle widdle diddle bum 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 ba. As they passed the brow of the hill, however, and descended on the other side, the sounds gradually died away, whereat they all felt much relieved. "I'm glad I don't have to live with the organ man, aren't you, Polly?" said Dorothy. "Yes, indeed," answered the Rainbow's Daughter. "He's nice," declared Button Bright soberly. "I hope your Princess Ozma won't invite him to her birthday celebration," remarked the Shaggy Man. for the fellow's music would drive her guests all crazy. You've given me an idea, Button-Bright. I believe the Musicker must have swallowed an accordion in his youth." "What's cordion?" asked the boy. "It's a kind of pleading," explained Dorothy, putting down the dog. "Bow wow!" said Toto, and ran away at a mad gallop to chase a bumblebee. End of chapter 8. Nine of the Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. Facing the Scoodlers. The country wasn't so pretty now. Before the travelers appeared a rocky plain covered with hills on which grew nothing green. They were nearing some low mountains, too, and the road, which before had been smooth and pleasant to walk upon, grew rough and uneven. Button-Bright's little feet stumbled more than once, and Polychrome ceased her dancing, because the walking was now so difficult that she had no trouble to keep warm. It had become afternoon, yet there wasn't a thing for their luncheon except 2 apples which the Shaggy Man had taken from the breakfast table. He divided these into 4 pieces and gave a portion to each of his companions. Dorothy and Button-Bright were glad to get theirs, but Polly was satisfied with a small bite, and Toto did not like apples. "Do you know," asked the Rainbow's Daughter, "if this is the right road to the Emerald City?" "No, I don't," replied Dorothy, "but it's the only road in this part of the country, so we may as well go to the end of it." "It looks now as if it might end pretty soon," remarked the Shaggy Man. "And what shall we do if it does?" "Don't know," said Button-Bright. "If I had my magic belt," replied Dorothy thoughtfully, "it could do us a lot of good just now." "What is your magic belt?" asked Polychrome. "It's a thing I captured from the Nome King one day, and it can do most any wonderful thing. But I left it with Ozma, you know, 'cause magic won't work in Kansas, but only in fairy countries." "Is this a fairy country?" asked Button-Bright. "I should think you'd know," said the little girl gravely. "If it wasn't a fairy country you couldn't have a fox head, and the Shaggy Man couldn't have a donkey head, and the Rainbow's Daughter would be invisible." "What's that?" asked the boy. "You don't seem to know anything, Button-Bright. Invisible is a thing you can't see." "Then Toto's invisible," declared the boy, and Dorothy found he was right. Toto had disappeared from view, but they could hear him barking furiously among the heaps of gray rock ahead of them. They moved forward a little faster to see what the dog was barking at, and found, perched upon a point of rock by the roadside, a curious creature. It had the form of a man, middle-sized and rather slender and graceful, but as it sat silent and motionless upon the peak they could see that its face was black as ink, and it wore a black cloth costume made like a union suit and fitting tight to its skin. Its hands were black, too, and its toes curled down like a bird's. The creature was black all over except its hair, which was fine and yellow, banged in front across the black forehead and cut close at the sides. The eyes, which were fixed steadily upon the barking dog, were small and sparkling, and looked like the eyes of a weasel. "What in the world do you s'pose that is?" asked Dorothy in a hushed voice, as the little group of travelers stood watching the strange creature. "Don't know," said Button-Bright. The thing gave a jump and turned half around, sitting in the same place, but with the other side of its body facing them. Instead of being black, it was now pure white, with a face like that of a clown in a circus, and hair of a brilliant purple. The creature could bend either way, and its white toes now curled the same way the black ones on the other side had done. "It has a face both front and back," whispered Dorothy wonderingly, "only there's no back at all, but 2 fronts." Having made the turn, the being sat motionless as before, while Toto barked louder at the white man than he had done at the black one. "Once," said the Shaggy Man, "I had a jumping jack like that with 2 faces." "Was it alive?" asked Button-Bright. "No," replied the Shaggy Man. "It worked on strings and was made of wood." "Wonder if this works with strings," said Dorothy. But Polychrome cried "Look!" for another creature just like the first had suddenly appeared sitting on another rock, its black side toward them. The two twisted their heads around and showed a black face on the white side of one and a white face on the black side of the other. "How curious!" said Polychrome. "And how loose their heads seem to be! Are they friendly to us, do you think?" "Can't tell, Polly," replied Dorothy. "Let's ask 'em." The creatures flopped first one way and then the other, showing black or white by turns, and now another joined them, appearing on another rock. Our friends had come to a little hollow in the hills, and the place where they now stood was surrounded by jagged peaks of rock, except where the road ran through. "Now there are 4 of them," said the Shaggy Man. "5," declared Polychrome. "6," said Dorothy. "Lots of 'em!" cried Button-Bright, and so there were. Quite a row of the two-sided black and white creatures sitting on the rocks all around. Toto stopped barking and ran between Dorothy's feet, where he crouched down as if afraid. The creatures did not look pleasant or friendly, to be sure, and the Shaggy Man's donkey head became solemn indeed. "Ask 'em who they are and what they want," whispered Dorothy. So the Shaggy Man called out in a loud voice: "Who are you?" "Scoodlers!" they yelled in chorus, their voices sharp and shrill. "What do you want?" called the Shaggy Man. "You!" they yelled back, pointing their thin fingers at the group, and they all flopped around so they were white, and then all flopped back again so they were black. "But what do you want us for?" asked the Shaggy Man uneasily. "Soup!" they all shouted, as if with one voice. "Goodness me!" said Dorothy, trembling a little. "The Scootlers must be regular cannibals." "Don't want to be soup," protested Button-Bright, beginning to cry. "Hush, dear," said the little girl, trying to comfort him. "We don't any of us want to be soup. But don't worry, the Shaggy Man will take care of us." "Will he?" asked Polychrome, who did not like the Scootlers at all, and kept close to Dorothy. "I'll try," promised the Shaggy Man, but he looked worried. Happening just then to feel the Love Magnet in his pocket, he said to the creatures with more confidence: "Don't you love me?" "Yes!" they shouted all together. "Then you mustn't harm me or my friends," said the Shaggy Man firmly. "We love you in soup!" they yelled, and in a flash turned their white sides to the front. "How dreadful!" said Dorothy. "This is a time, Shaggy Man, when you get loved too much." "Don't want to be soup," wailed Button-Bright again, and Toto began to whine dismally, as if he didn't want to be soup either. "The only thing to do," said the Shaggy Man to his friends in a low voice, "is to get out of this pocket in the rocks as soon as we can, and leave the Scootlers behind us. Follow me, my dears, and don't pay any attention to what they do or say." With this he began to march along the road to the opening in the rocks ahead, and the others kept close behind him. But the Scootlers closed up in front, as if to bar their way, and so the Shaggy Man stooped down and picked up a loose stone, which he threw at the creatures to scare them from the path. At this the Scootlers raised a howl. 2 of them picked their heads from their shoulders and hurled them at the Shaggy Man with such force that he fell over in a heap, greatly astonished. The 2 now ran forward with swift leaps, caught up their heads and put them on again, after which they sprang back to their positions on the rocks. End of chapter 9. Of the Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. Escaping the Soup Kettle. The Shaggy Man got up and felt himself to see if he was hurt, but he was not. One of the heads had struck his breast and the other his left shoulder, yet though they had knocked him down, the heads were not hard enough to bruise him. "Come on," he said firmly. We've got to get out of here some way," and forward he started again. The Scootlers began yelling and throwing their heads in great numbers at our frightened friends. The Shaggy Man was knocked over again, and so was Button Bright, who kicked his heels against the ground and howled as loud as he could, although he was not hurt a bit. One head struck Toto, who first yelped and then grabbed the head by an ear and started running away with it. The Scootlers who had thrown their heads began to scramble down and run to pick them up with wonderful quickness, but the one whose head Toto had stolen found it hard to get it back again. The head couldn't see the body with either pair of its eyes, because the dog was in the way, so the headless Scoodler stumbled around over the rocks and tripped on them more than once in its effort to regain its top. Toto was trying to get outside the rocks and roll the head down the hill, but some of the other Scootlers came to the rescue of their unfortunate comrade and pelted the dog with their own heads until he was obliged to drop his burden and hurry back to Dorothy. The little girl and the Rainbow's Daughter had both escaped the shower of heads, but they saw now that it would be useless to try to run away from the dreadful Scootlers. "We may as well submit," declared the Shaggy Man in a rueful voice, as he got upon his feet again. He turned toward their foes and asked, "What do you want us to do?" "Come!" they cried in a triumphant chorus, and at once sprang from the rocks and surrounded their captives on all sides. One funny thing about the Scootlers was that they could walk in either direction, coming or going, without turning around, because they had two faces and, as Dorothy said, two front sides, and their feet were shaped like the letter T upside down. They moved with great rapidity, and there was something about their glittering eyes and contrasting colors and removable heads that inspired the poor prisoners with horror and made them long to escape. But the creatures led their captives away from the rocks and the road, down the hill by a side path, until they came before a low mountain of rock that looked like a huge bowl turned upside down. At the edge of this mountain was a deep gulf, so deep that when you looked into it there was nothing but blackness below. Across the gulf was a narrow bridge of rock, and at the other end of the bridge was an arched opening that led into the mountain. Over this bridge the Scootlers led their prisoners, through the opening into the mountain, which they found to be an immense hollow dome, lighted by several holes in the roof. All around the circular space were built rock houses, set close together, each with a door in the front wall. None of these houses was more than 6 feet wide, but the Scootlers were thin people sidewise and did not need much room. So vast was the dome that there was a space in the middle of the cave, in front of all these houses, where the creatures might congregate as in a great hall. It made Dorothy shudder to see a huge iron kettle suspended by a stout chain in the middle of the place, and underneath the kettle a great heap of kindling wood and shavings ready to light. "What's that?" asked the Shaggy Man, drawing back as they approached this place, so that they were forced to push him forward. "The soup kettle!" yelled the Scootlers, and then they shouted in the next breath, "We're hungry!" Button Bright, holding Dorothy's hand in one chubby fist and Polly's hand in the other, was so affected by this shout that he began to cry again, repeating the protest, "Don't want to be soup, I don't!" "Never mind," said the Shaggy Man consolingly. "I ought to make enough soup to feed them all, I'm so big. So I'll ask them to put me in the kettle first." "All right," said Button Bright more cheerfully. But the Scootlers were not ready to make soup yet. They led the captives into a house at the farthest side of the cave, a house somewhat wider than the others. "Who lives here?" asked the Rainbow's Daughter. The Scootlers nearest her replied, "The Queen." It made Dorothy hopeful to learn that a woman ruled over these fierce creatures, but a moment later they were ushered by 2 or 3 of the escort into a gloomy, bare room, and her hope died away. For the queen of the Scootlers proved to be much more dreadful in appearance than any of her people. One side of her was fiery red, with jet black hair and green eyes, and the other side of her was bright yellow, with crimson hair and black eyes. She wore a short skirt of red and yellow, and her hair, instead of being banged, was a tangle of short curls upon which rested a circular crown of silver, much dented and twisted, because the queen had thrown her head at so many things so many times. Her form was lean and bony, and both her faces were deeply wrinkled. "What have we here?" asked the queen sharply, as our friends were made to stand before her. "Soup!" cried the guard of the Scootlers, speaking together. "We're not," said Dorothy indignantly. "We're nothing of the sort."
"Ah, but you will be soon," retorted the queen,
a grim smile making her look more dreadful than before. "Pardon me, most beautiful vision," said the Shaggy Man, bowing before the queen politely. "I must request your Serene Highness to let us go our way without being made into soup, for I own the Love Magnet, and whoever meets me must love me and all my friends."
"True," replied the queen. "We love you very much, so much that we intend to eat your broth with real pleasure. But tell me, do you think I am so beautiful?"
"You won't be at all beautiful if you eat me," he said, shaking his head sadly. "Handsome is as handsome does, you know." The queen turned to Button-Bright.
"Do you think I'm beautiful?" she asked.
"No," said the boy. "You're ugly."
"I think you're a fright," said Dorothy.
"If you could see yourself, you'd be terribly scared," added Polly. The queen scowled at them, and flopped from her red side to her yellow side.
"Take them away," she commanded the guard, "and at 6 o'clock run them through the meat chopper and start the soup kettle boiling. And put plenty of salt in the broth this time, or I'll punish the cook severely."
"And onions, your Majesty?" asked one of the guard.
"Plenty of onions and garlic, and a dash of red pepper. Now go."
The Scootlers led the captives away and shut them up in one of the houses, leaving only a single Scoodler to keep guard. The place was a sort of storehouse, containing bags of potatoes and baskets of carrots, onions, and turnips. "These," said their guard, pointing to the vegetables, "we use to flavor our soups with." The prisoners were rather disheartened by this time, for they saw no way to escape, and did not know how soon it would be 6 o'clock, and the time for the meat chopper to begin work. But the Shaggy Man was brave, and did not intend to submit to such a horrid fate without a struggle. "I'm going to fight for our lives," he whispered to the children, "for if I fail we will be no worse off than before, and to sit here quietly until we are made into soup would be foolish and cowardly." The Scoodler on guard stood near the doorway, turning first his white side toward them and then his black side, as if he wanted to show to all of his greedy 4 eyes the sight of so many fat prisoners. The captives sat in a sorrowful group at the other end of the room, except Polychrome, who danced back and forth in the little place to keep herself warm, for she felt the chill of the cave. Whenever she approached the Shaggy Man, he would whisper something in her ear, and Polly would nod her pretty head as if she understood. The Shaggy Man told Dorothy and Button-Bright to stand before him while he emptied the potatoes out of one of the sacks. When this had been secretly done, little Polychrome, dancing near to the guard, suddenly reached out her hand and slapped his face, the next instant whirling away from him quickly to rejoin her friends. The angry Scoodler at once picked off his head and hurled it at the Rainbow's Daughter, but the Shaggy Man was expecting that, and caught the head very neatly, putting it in the sack, which he tied at the mouth. The body of the guard, not having the eyes of its head to guide it, ran here and there in an aimless manner, and the Shaggy Man easily dodged it and opened the door. Fortunately, there was no one in the big cave at that moment, so he told Dorothy and Polly to run as fast as they could for the entrance and out across the narrow bridge. "I'll carry Button-Bright," he said, for he knew the little boy's legs were too short to run fast. Dorothy picked up Toto and then seized Polly's hand and ran swiftly toward the entrance to the cave. The Shaggy Man perched Button-Bright on his shoulders and ran after them. They moved so quickly, and their escape was so wholly unexpected, that they had almost reached the bridge when one of the Scootlers looked out of his house and saw them. The creature raised a shrill cry that brought all of its fellows bounding out of the numerous doors, and at once they started in chase. Dorothy and Polly had reached the bridge and crossed it when the Scootlers began throwing their heads. One of the queer missiles struck the Shaggy Man on his back and nearly knocked him over, but he was at the mouth of the cave now, so he set down Button-Bright and told the boy to run across the bridge to Dorothy. Then the Shaggy Man turned around and faced his enemies, standing just outside the opening, and as fast as they threw their heads at him he caught them and tossed them into the black gulf below. The headless bodies of the foremost Scootlers kept the others from running close up, but they also threw their heads in an effort to stop the escaping prisoners. The Shaggy Man caught them all and sent them whirling down into the black gulf. Among them he noticed the crimson and yellow head of the Queen, and this he tossed after the others with a right good will. Presently every Scoodler of the lot had thrown its head, and every head was down in the deep gulf, and now the helpless bodies of the creatures were mixed together in the cave and wriggling around in a vain attempt to discover what had become of their heads. The Shaggy Man laughed and walked across the bridge to rejoin his companions. "It's lucky I learned to play baseball when I was young," he remarked, "for I caught all those heads easily and never missed one. But come along, little ones. The Scootlers will never bother us or anyone else any more." Button-Bright was still frightened and kept insisting, "I don't want to be soup," for the victory had been gained so suddenly that the boy did not realize they were free and safe. But the Shaggy Man assured him that all danger of their being made into soup was now past, as the Scootlers would be unable to eat soup for some time to come. So now, anxious to get away from the horrid gloomy cave as soon as possible, they hastened up the hillside and regained the road just beyond the place where they had first met the Scootlers, and you may be sure they were glad to find their feet on the old familiar path again. End of chapter 10.